Today's topic is GMO, or the Genetically Modified Organism. Let's start with the definition of GMO. GMO, or the Genetically Modified Organism, is an organism whose genome has been engineered in the laboratory in order to favor the expression of desired psychological traits or the generations of desired biological products. In conventional livestock production, crop farming, and even pet breeding, it has long been the practice to breed select individuals of a species in order to produce offspring that have desirable traits. Genetically modified organisms are produced using scientific methods that include recombinant DNA technology and reproductive cloning. Recombinant DNA involves the insertion of one or more individual genes from an organism of one species into the DNA of another. Cloning is the process of generating a genetically identical copy of a cell or an organism. For example, a cell replicates itself asexually without any genetic alteration or recombination and produces the same identical organism. When this happens, it is called cloning. Genetically modified organism is commonly used to describe any of these terms and vice versa. Genetic modification, GM seeds, biotechnology, biotech seeds, genetic engineering, and transgenic crops.
Moving to the next part of the discussion, let us now discuss the pros and cons of GMOs. Let's start first with its benefits. For its benefits, we have here first the increase in crop yields. The reduction of losses by pests, viruses, and weeds that compete for soil nutrients, together with savings of phytosanitary products and fuel, indirectly increase the final yield when compared with conventional crops. When plants are able to spend less energy defending against insects, they are able to devote most of these resources to producing seeds, resulting in higher yields. Second is the reduced cost for food production. GMO crops allow farmers to produce affordable food by using less land, water, and pesticides, which reduce farmers' input costs while also resulting in higher crop yields. By doing these two things combined, we are producing more food with less inputs, and it specifically helps reduce the price of by as much as 15-30%. Third is the reduced usage of pesticides. Backers of GMOs point to the example of crops containing new genes that fight off insect pests, so farmers don't have to spray insecticides. Decreased use of pesticides means less pesticide production demand and also less energy use on the farmer's end too. This saves farmers money and reduces the number of pesticides that end up on crops. Fourth is the enhanced nutrient composition and food quality. A gene selected for modification can increase or decrease the vitamin, mineral, or fatty acid content found in the modified food. For example, golden rice is genetically altered to increase its beta-carotene content. Another example of this would be food with more desirable traits, such as potatoes, that are altered and so that it could produce less of a cancer-causing substance when fried. The fifth one is the resistance to pests and disease. Disease resistance is the ability to prevent or reduce the presence of diseases in otherwise susceptible hosts. And according to Joanne Conroe from Alliance for Science, through the use of GMOs, disease resistance was achieved by transferring two resistance genes from sweet pepper into banana, both singly and as stacked traits. And these genes have provided disease resistance in other plants including tobacco, tomato, orchids, calla lily, and rice. As for the resistance to pests, according to an interview from Purdue University, scientists were able to modify the plant's protein manufacturing system so that it now makes a protein that wasn't previously present. This carefully selected protein is one that is toxic to certain insects. Basically, they eat it and their stomach ruptures. This protein is so specifically targeted towards certain pests that it doesn't affect other insects, animals, or humans that eat it.
Now, let's go to the risks of GMO. The first risk of GMO is unknown long-term effects. GMO is still quite new to us, and further research and study are needed to prove that it is safe for the long run. Otherwise, we would be in the dark here on its long-term effects. The second risk of GMO is immunosuppression. There was a study conducted by Lancet, which is a well-respected British medical journal wherein they fed rats with genetically modified potatoes that contains biopesticide. On the other end, the genetically modified potatoes shown detrimental effects on immune function, organ development, and body metabolism of the rats. The third risk of GMO is allergy. GMOs are injected with foreign genes from different crops or things that can cause allergic reaction to people when eaten. The fourth risk of GMO is it threatens some important insects in the ecosystem. Some herbicides that are put in GMO for them to be resistant to pests are dangerous to some insects that are important in the food chain. Yes, we can say that it really helps the crops because the pests are resistant to it. But what about the other insects that are lurking around in the field of those crops? The fifth risk of GMO is antibiotic resistance. The genetic modifications done to GMO products lead to the crop's resistance to pests and diseases. However, there is a small chance that genes in the food can make the genes resistant to some antibiotics.
But do you ever wonder what was the main reason why organisms or crops were modified? Well, there are a variety of reasons why GMOs are created and they serve many purposes. But first, let's take a look back at the discussion a while ago with respect to the definition of a GMO. GMOs are developed with genetic engineering, a more precise breeding technique that enables someone to take individual traits found in nature and transfer them to another plant or make changes to an existing trait in a plant. You may also have heard of agriculture biotechnology or biotech seeds. These are terms that may be used to refer to the same thing, a genetically modified organism or GMO. Now, let's talk about why GMOs. What is its purpose? Research would tell us that GMO aims to address issues with regard to food security, agriculture, drug production, and nutrition. In other words, GMOs are somehow a way to address the growing global population and climate change. With a growing population, there is a greater pressure to feed more people. But let's dig deeper on that. With respect to GMOs in agriculture, most of the GMO crops grown today were developed to help farmers prevent crop loss. The three most common traits found in GMO crops are resistance to insect damage, tolerance to herbicides, and resistant to plant viruses. Now let's dissect each one of them. For GMO crops that are resistant to insect damage, farmers can apply fewer spray of pesticides to protect the crops. GMO crops that are tolerant to herbicides help farmers control weeds without damaging the crops. When farmers use these herbicide-tolerant crops, they do not need to till the soil, which they normally do to get rid of weeds. This no-till planting helps to maintain soil health and lower fuel and labor use. Taken together now, studies have shown positive economic and environmental impacts. Now we are faced with the question of whether GMOs crops have impacts beyond the farm. The most common GMO crops were developed to address the needs of the farmers, but in return, they can actually help foods become more accessible and affordable for consumers. With the things discussed in this video, such as the risks of GMOs and what does it entails to us, and given the promise of this technology for the people of the 21st century, the real question is that should it be embraced as a saving grace, or is it to be feared as a possible threat at all to a sustainable food supply? And that ends our presentation. We hope you learned something.